We must strike here, before dawn. This is our only chance to reclaim the territory.
Agreed. We attack.
If you hear the name Rani Lakshmibai today, you're almost certainly picturing this: a warrior queen, sword raised high, charging into battle with her young child tied to her back. That image established her as the defining symbol of Indian resistance against colonial rule. Decades later, it served as the namesake for an all-female military regiment in World War II. But the heavy romanticism surrounding her legend tends to obscure the actual human being underneath. Before she ever picked up a sword, she was a terrifyingly competent administrator and a legal strategist. To understand how she actually threatened the British Empire, we have to look closely at her time in the boardroom. By the year 1853, the British East India Company was absorbing Indian states using a policy called the Doctrine of Lapse. When the Raja of Jhansi died, Governor-General Lord Dalhousie invoked this doctrine to refuse recognition of the Raja's adopted son. Jhansi was effectively annexed. Instead of immediate rebellion, the Rani chose a sophisticated diplomatic counteroffensive. She hired an Australian lawyer and began meticulously citing historical treaties from 1803 and 1817 that legally guaranteed her family's sovereignty. She even utilized Hindu Shastra tradition, drafting formal appeals that built a comprehensive legal framework to prove her adopted son's absolute right to the throne. Dalhousie read these appeals. He didn't bother refuting her arguments. He simply issued a blunt rejection and formally stripped the Rani of her royal authority. The British built a rigid diplomatic and legal system, then entirely ignored its rules when challenged. Pushed into a corner, military resistance became her only viable mechanism for survival. In May 1857, native troops mutinied, sparking a massive rebellion across India. Following a bloody massacre of British personnel stationed in Jhansi, the Rani suddenly found herself in absolute control of the state. She was unusually prepared for this. Growing up in Varanasi, she hadn't received a traditional aristocratic education. Instead, she was trained in fencing, firearms, and horsemanship. Upon taking command, her orders were immediate and highly tactical. She repaired the city's fort, ordered the casting of new heavy guns, and mobilized an armed all-female regiment to fend off invasions from opportunistic neighboring kingdoms. She didn't passively wait for the war to arrive at her doorstep. She methodically militarized her state for the conflict she knew was coming. That conflict arrived in March 1858, when Major General Hugh Rose marched a heavily armed British counterinsurgency force to the gates of Jhansi. They found a city entirely prepared for a siege. The Rani had actively cleared the surrounding countryside of all cover and foliage, while stockpiling hundreds of tons of supplies inside the town. Her primary defense relied on the city's formidable 25-foot-thick loopholed granite walls. These walls were topped with heavy guns, arranged in enfilading batteries. The cannons were positioned so their lines of fire would intersect, creating overlapping kill zones that covered every conceivable angle of approach. When British artillery finally breached the walls on April 3rd, the Rani personally led a fierce hand-to-hand counterattack, commanding a force of 1,500 Afghan troops directly into the melee. While the British eventually forced her to retreat, her meticulously planned defense proved she could hold her own in complex siege warfare against the era's premier military superpower. Recognizing the fort was lost, the Rani executed a daring midnight escape. Slipping through the British perimeter on horseback, she rode over 100 miles to regroup with other rebel leaders. She eventually retreated to Gwalior Fort. There, she organized a fresh line of defense, ultimately making a fatal final stand while charging directly into a squadron of British Hussar cavalry. After the battle, General Hugh Rose filed his post-mortem report. The man who had spent months trying to destroy her officially classified the Rani as the best and bravest of the rebels. Dying in battle rather than facing capture or exile turned her from a defeated political leader into a martyr. In the decades that followed, 20th-century Indian nationalists recognized the power of her story. Writers like Subhadra Kumari Chauhan published popular poetry that elevated the Rani to a figure of Shakti, an embodiment of primal female energy. The revolutionary leader Subhas Chandra Bose leaned into this symbolism heavily. When he formed a female volunteer force during World War II, he named it the Rani of Jhansi Regiment. Today, The legacy of 1857 is still evolving. Dalit communities challenge traditional upper caste narratives by elevating their own historical heroes from the rebellion, like the warrior Jhansi Bai. Ultimately, Rani Lakshmibai's enduring power stems from the historical reality of a woman who used every available weapon, from legal treatises to heavy artillery.